German officers stopped sharing their positions over the radio. Battalion commanders refused to stand near windows. Entire advances halted because no one dared to move first. In the frozen hell of Stalingrad, the Wehrmacht had faced Soviet artillery, T-34 tanks, and waves of desperate infantry. But nothing terrified them, like a single man they couldn't see. They called him Der Geist, the Ghost. Soviet command called him Sergeant Ivan Sidorenko. And what the Nazis couldn't do to him with bullets, his own side would accomplish with a pen and a signature. Winter, 1942. The city of Stalingrad had become a graveyard of steel and stone. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky. The Volga River behind the Soviet lines froze solid, cutting off supply routes. Temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Others burned to death when their positions were hit by flamethrowers. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier arriving in Stalingrad was 24 hours. Even Sidorenko wasn't supposed to survive even that long. He arrived in October, part of a reinforcement unit thrown into the meat grinder. Before the war, he'd been nothing special. A factory worker from a village outside Moscow. No military family, no party connections, just a young man who knew how to hunt deer in the forests around his home. His father had taught him to shoot when he was 12 years old. Patient, calm, one shot, one kill, don't waste ammunition. In peacetime, those skills put food on the table. In war, they made him valuable. The Soviet army desperately needed snipers. Not just shooters, but hunters. Men who could lie motionless for hours in the snow, waiting for a single opportunity. Men who could read the battlefield, predict movement, understand psychology. The German advance had pushed deep into Soviet territory. They had better equipment, better training, better logistics. But they didn't have the advantage of desperation. And they didn't have men like Sidorenko. His first confirmed kill came on his third day in Stalingrad. A German officer, maybe 200 meters away, standing too long in one spot while directing mortar fire. Sidorenko watched him through his scope. Watched the way he moved. Watched the pattern. Officers always had patterns. This one checked his watch every few minutes, anxious, probably waiting for reinforcements or air support. Sidorenko waited until the next time the officer raised his arm to check the time. The shot echoed through the ruins. The officer dropped. The mortar fire stopped. That night, Sidorenko's commander pulled him aside. "How many rounds did you use?" "1. "How certain are you of the kill?" "Certain." The commander nodded. "Good. Tomorrow you hunt again." And hunt he did. The battlefield of Stalingrad wasn't like the open fields of earlier campaigns. This was urban warfare at its most brutal. Every building was a fortress, every window was a firing position, every pile of rubble hid a machine gun nest. The Germans controlled most of the city, but the Soviets clung to a thin strip along the Volga. The two armies fought for individual rooms, individual floors, individual staircases. Sometimes the front line ran down the middle of a hallway. In this chaos, a skilled sniper was worth a company of infantry. Sidorenko learned the rhythm of the battle. He learned when German patrols changed shifts. He learned which routes their supply runners used. He learned to identify officers by their posture, their uniforms, their behavior. Officers were priority targets. Kill an officer and you disrupt command. Kill enough officers and you create fear. Fear was a weapon as powerful as any bullet. He worked mostly alone. though sometimes he paired with a spotter named Dmitri. Dmitri was younger, maybe 19, with eyes that had already seen too much. They developed a system. Dmitri would scout positions during the day, mapping German movements, identifying targets. Sidorenko would study the information, plan his shots, choose his locations. They moved constantly. Never used the same position twice. The Germans had their own snipers, their own hunters. Stay in one place too long, and you became the prey. By November, Sidorenko had 23 confirmed kills. By December, 41. His name started appearing in reports. Not just Soviet reports, German ones too. The Wehrmacht kept meticulous records. Their intelligence officers tracked Soviet snipers, trying to identify patterns, predict locations, organize counter-sniper operations. Sidorenko's kills had a signature: long-range shots, high-value targets, clean executions. The Germans realized they weren't dealing with a lucky soldier. They were dealing with a professional. One captured German document, translated by Soviet intelligence, described him as extremely dangerous and recommended immediate action upon identification. Another report mentioned that an entire company refused to advance through a particular sector because the Ghost was believed to be operating there. The nickname stuck. Der Geist. The Ghost. Soviet propaganda loved it. They needed heroes. They needed proof that individual Soviet soldiers could match or exceed the Germans. Newspaper articles appeared, though they never used Sidorenko's real name. Operational security demanded anonymity. Radio broadcasts mentioned the Ghost of Stalingrad, who hunted Nazis through the ruins. Soldiers in other units heard the stories and felt a spark of hope. If one man could terrify the enemy, maybe they could win this war. But Sidorenko didn't think about propaganda. He thought about staying alive. Every morning he woke up in whatever hole or basement served as shelter. He ate whatever food was available, usually a handful of frozen bread, sometimes thin soup if the supply lines hadn't been cut. He cleaned his rifle with obsessive care. The Mosin Nagant wasn't the most sophisticated weapon, but it was reliable. In temperatures that froze machine guns and jammed automatics, the Mosin still fired. He knew every part of that rifle, knew how wind affected the bullet at different ranges, knew how cold metal changed the shot, knew how to compensate for the shake of exhaustion and fear. Then he went hunting. His hunting grounds were the ruins of the Red October factory and the surrounding blocks. Industrial wasteland turned battlefield, twisted metal, collapsed walls, craters filled with frozen water. The smell of smoke and death was constant. Bodies lay where they fell, Soviet, German, civilian. No one had time to bury them. The cold preserved them like statues, grotesque monuments to the insanity of the fighting. Sidorenko moved through this landscape like a shadow. He understood concealment not just as hiding, but as becoming part of the environment. He wrapped himself in white cloth, scavenged from destroyed buildings. He moved during artillery barrages when the explosions covered sound. He positioned himself in places no one expected: collapsed chimneys, half-buried basements, holes in factory walls. He learned to control his breathing so the vapor wouldn't give away his position in the cold air. He learned to stay motionless for hours, ignoring the pain in his joints, the numbness in his fingers, the desperate need to move. And he learned to read his enemy. German soldiers were predictable in their efficiency. They followed doctrine. They maintained schedules. They trusted their equipment and their training. These were strengths in conventional warfare. But in Stalingrad, predictability was fatal. Sidorenko exploited every pattern. The supply truck that arrived at the same time every morning. The radio operator who always set up his antenna in the same spot. The platoon leader who insisted on personally checking defensive positions. Each kill was calculated. Each shot was a message. You are not safe. Your rank will not protect you. Your experience will not save you. We are still here. We are still fighting. By January 1943, Sidorenko had over 60 confirmed kills. The number would have been higher, but Soviet doctrine required confirmation, a witness, or physical evidence. Many of his shots were never officially recorded. Bodies disappeared in the rubble. Witnesses died before filing reports. But the Germans knew. Their casualty lists knew. Their officers knew. They put a price on his head. 5,000 Reichsmarks for information leading to his elimination. It was an enormous sum, more than most German soldiers earned in a year. Soviet intelligence intercepted the order and reported it up the chain of command. Sidorenko became officially valuable. That was when everything started to go wrong. Recognition brought attention. Attention brought scrutiny. And scrutiny in Stalin's Soviet Union was often more dangerous than enemy fire. Success in the Soviet army was a dangerous thing. It attracted praise from your superiors, envy from your peers, and suspicion from the political officers who watched everyone. Ivan Sidorenko was about to learn that in Stalin's military, being too good at killing the enemy could make you look like a traitor. The same skills that made him valuable on the battlefield, independence, initiative, the ability to work alone, were exactly the traits that made political commissars nervous. And in 1943, a nervous commissar was more deadly than a German sniper. The first sign came in late January. Sidorenko was summoned to battalion headquarters, a reinforced basement 3 blocks behind the front line. He assumed it was a routine briefing or a new assignment. Instead, he found himself facing 3 men. His company commander, a political officer he'd never met, and an NKVD lieutenant whose presence made the temperature in the room feel even colder than the winter outside. The political officer's name was Volkov. Thin face, dark eyes that never blinked. He wore a clean uniform, unusual in Stalingrad, where everyone was covered in dirt and blood. That cleanliness bothered Sidorenko more than he wanted to admit. It meant Volkov spent his time far from the fighting, which meant he didn't understand what happened at the front line. And men who didn't understand were dangerous. Sergeant Sidorenko, Volkov began, his voice flat and bureaucratic. Your recent success has been noted. 63 confirmed eliminations. Impressive. He paused, leafing through a file. Perhaps too impressive. Sidorenko said nothing. In the Soviet system, silence was often the safest response. We have questions about your methods, Volkov continued. You work alone. You refuse spotters. You select your own targets without consulting command. You operate with significant autonomy. This raises concerns about accountability. The company commander shifted uncomfortably. He'd always supported Sidorenko, but in front of the political officer and the NKVD, even commanders became careful. The NKVD lieutenant remained silent, taking notes. With respect, comrade political officer, Sidorenko said carefully, sniper work requires independence. I go where the enemy is. I adapt to changing conditions. I cannot wait for orders when opportunities appear. Or perhaps, Volkov said, his voice sharpening, You have become accustomed to operating outside the collective. Perhaps you believe yourself above the authority of the party and the command structure. It was a trap. Every word Sidorenko said could be twisted. Too much defense sounded like arrogance. Too little sounded like guilt. He chose his words with the same precision he used to choose targets. I serve the Soviet Union. I follow orders. My only goal is to kill fascists. Volkov smiled without warmth. We shall see. The interrogation, because that's what it was, lasted 2 hours. They questioned everything. How did he confirm his kills? Who witnessed them? Why did he move position so frequently? Why did he sometimes disappear for days? Where exactly did he go? Who did he speak to? Did he have contact with anyone outside his unit? The questions seemed random, but Sidorenko recognized the pattern. They were building a file, looking for inconsistencies, creating a narrative. In Stalin's Soviet Union, the NKVD didn't ask questions because they wanted answers. They asked questions because they'd already decided on the answers and needed to justify them. When they finally dismissed him, the company commander pulled him aside. "Be careful," he whispered. "There are people who believe success can only come from betrayal. Watch what you say. Watch who you trust." Sidorenko returned to the front line, but something had shifted. He felt eyes on him now, not German eyes through scopes, those he understood. These were Soviet eyes, watching, judging, waiting for him to make a mistake. The next week his ammunition allocation was reduced. No explanation, just fewer rounds. For a sniper, ammunition was life. Each bullet was precious. Reducing his supply was like cutting off his air. He complained to his commander, who promised to investigate, but looked uncomfortable. The ammunition never increased. Then his rifle disappeared. He'd left it in the armory overnight. Standard procedure when rotating off the line. When he returned the next morning to collect it, the quartermaster claimed no knowledge of it. The log showed no record of him turning it in. Sidorenko knew he'd signed the log. He'd watched the quartermaster file the weapon. But now both the rifle and the paperwork had vanished. It took 3 days to get a replacement. 3 days of sitting idle while Germans moved freely through his sector. 3 days of watching opportunities pass. 3 days of falling further behind in the war he'd been winning. When he finally got a new rifle, it wasn't his carefully calibrated Mosin Nagant. It was a standard issue weapon that shot slightly left at distance. He spent precious ammunition re-zeroing the sights, learning its peculiarities, adapting his technique. By the time he returned to full effectiveness, 2 weeks had passed. His kill count stagnated. Volkov noted this in reports. Sergeant Sidorenko's performance has declined significantly, one report stated. Previous claims of effectiveness may have been exaggerated. Other snipers in the unit began receiving recognition that had previously gone to Sidorenko. Their kills were publicized. Their names appeared in unit newspapers. Photos were taken. Medals were discussed. Sidorenko, who'd been the most successful sniper in the battalion, was suddenly invisible. He understood what was happening. They were erasing him. Not physically, not yet, but bureaucratically. If his achievements disappeared from the records, so did his value. And soldiers without value were expendable. The rumors started in February. Whispers in the trenches. Suspicious looks from men he'd fought beside for months. Someone claimed they'd seen Sidorenko talking to a German prisoner. Someone else said his shots were too accurate, that he must have prior training. that maybe he'd worked with Germans before the war. Another rumor suggested he was stealing supplies and trading them with the enemy. None of it was true. All of it was believed. Dmitri, his former spotter, pulled him aside one night. They sat in a bombed-out basement, sharing a cigarette. Dmitri looked scared. "They came to me," he said quietly. "Political officers. Asked questions about you. Where you go. What you do. Who you talk to." He paused. "They wanted me to write a statement." "What kind of statement?" "About suspicious behavior. About times you might have acted against the interests of the Soviet Union." Dmitri looked at his hands. "I told them I had nothing to report, but they said everyone has something to report. They said loyalty means being honest about concerns, even about friends." Sidorenko felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "Did you write it?" "I had to write something. So I wrote that you're dedicated, that you follow orders, that you've never shown anything but loyalty." Dmitri met his eyes. "But I don't know what they'll do with it. I don't know how they'll read it." In the Soviet system, even support could be twisted into accusation. Defending someone too strongly suggested you were part of their conspiracy. The safest thing was to distance yourself, to denounce them first, before you became associated with their crimes. Dmitri knew this. Sidorenko knew this. Their friendship was now a liability. "Thank you for telling me," Sidorenko said. They never spoke privately again. The interrogations became more frequent. Every few days, Sidorenko was called back to headquarters. Same questions, different words. They were looking for contradictions, for any statement that didn't match previous statements. The NKVD lieutenant attended every session now. His presence, a silent threat. "Your kills have decreased," Volkov observed during one interrogation. "Why?" "Equipment problems, ammunition shortages. Or perhaps you've lost motivation. Perhaps you no longer wish to fight for the Soviet Union." "I fight every day, but with less success. Interesting timing, isn't it? Your effectiveness drops precisely when we begin scrutinizing your record." Volkov leaned forward. "Tell me, Sergeant, what are you hiding?" "Nothing. Everything." The truth was irrelevant. They'd decided he was guilty of something, and now they were working backward to find the crime. Other soldiers noticed. Men who'd once asked his advice now avoided him. No one wanted to be seen associating with someone under investigation. In the Soviet Army, suspicion was contagious. Stand too close to a suspect, and you became suspect yourself. Sidorenko continued hunting Germans, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. How could it be? He was fighting two wars now, one against the Nazis in front of him, one against his own command behind him, and he was losing both. In March, the orders came. He was to be transferred out of his unit. No explanation. No destination specified. Just orders to report to a transport depot behind the lines. His commander wouldn't meet his eyes when delivering the message. Sidorenko knew what transfers like this meant. Men who received such orders rarely returned to their units. They disappeared into the vast machinery of the Soviet military system. Some went to punishment battalions, Strafbats, where they were sent on suicide missions to redeem themselves through blood. Others went to prison camps. Others simply vanished, their names erased from rosters, their families told they'd died heroically. The night before his transfer, Sidorenko sat in the ruins of the Red October factory, where he'd spent so many days hunting. The city was quieter now. The German offensive had stalled. The tide was turning. The Soviets were winning. He'd helped make that happen. His bullets had killed officers, disrupted attacks, spread fear. He'd done everything they'd asked, and now they were destroying him for it. He thought about running. Desertion was punishable by death, but so was whatever awaited him at the depot. He thought about surrendering to the Germans, but that would validate everything the political officers suspected. He thought about fighting back, but against what? Against whom? You couldn't shoot suspicion. You couldn't kill bureaucracy. In the end, he reported for transfer as ordered, because he was still a Soviet soldier, because he still believed, despite everything, that the system would realize its mistake, because hope dies hard, even when everything else is already dead. The ghost of Stalingrad walked into the darkness, and the darkness swallowed him whole. The transport truck drove east, away from the front, away from the fighting, away from everything that made sense. Ivan Sidorenko sat in the back with 19 other men, all of them silent, all of them avoiding eye contact. Some wore the look of criminals who knew exactly why they were here. Others wore Sidorenko's expression, confusion mixed with dread, the face of soldiers who'd done their duty and were being punished for it. In Stalin's Soviet Union, there was no difference between a hero today and an enemy tomorrow. The only thing that changed was which side of the pen a political officer's signature fell on. The truck stopped at a checkpoint outside Saratov, 300 kilometers from Stalingrad. Guards examined papers. Someone shouted orders. The men were herded out of the truck and into a processing center, a converted school building with bars on the windows and armed soldiers at every door. This was where soldiers ceased being individuals and became numbers in a system designed to grind them into compliance or death. They stood in lines, gave their names, surrendered their belongings. Sidorenko handed over his rifle, the replacement weapon he'd barely learned to use. The clerk taking inventory didn't even look at him. Just another rifle, just another prisoner. That's what they were now, though no one used that word. They were transfers awaiting assignment, bureaucratic language to disguise the reality. The interrogation began that evening. A different room, but the same type of men. NKVD officers with files full of accusations. Political officers with memorized speeches about vigilance and betrayal. They didn't ask questions to learn truth. They asked questions to build cases. Sergeant Sidorenko, you are accused of falsifying military records. The officer reading the charges was older, gray-haired, with the tired eyes of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. It is alleged that you claimed kills you did not make, that you exaggerated your effectiveness to receive recognition and privileges, that you operated with suspicious independence, that your methods suggest prior contact with enemy forces. Each accusation was more absurd than the last. How could he falsify kills that required witnesses? How could prior contact with Germans make him a better sniper? The logic didn't matter. The accusations existed. Therefore, they must be investigated. An investigation required confession. These charges are false, Sidorenko said. I served loyally. Every kill was confirmed. Every action was in service of... Do not interrupt, the officer snapped. Your denials are noted. But we have testimony. Written statements from your comrades expressing concerns about your behavior. They produced documents, statements signed by men he'd fought beside. Some he recognized. Soldiers who'd been pressured to write something, anything, to avoid being associated with his case. Others were strangers, men he'd never met, claiming to have witnessed suspicious behavior they couldn't have seen because they'd never been near him. One statement claimed he'd been observed signaling enemy positions with a mirror. Another said he'd been heard speaking German. A third suggested he deliberately missed shots to preserve enemy officers he was supposedly working with. The contradictions were obvious. How could he both miss deliberately and falsify an inflated kill count? But contradictions didn't matter when the goal was condemnation, not truth. "I never did any of these things," Sidorenko insisted. "These accusations are impossible. Check the records. Talk to my commander. Verify. Your commander has been questioned. He admits he cannot verify your whereabouts at all times. He admits you operated with unusual independence. He admits you refused oversight on multiple occasions." Of course his commander said those things. A sniper had to operate independently. That was the nature of the work. But presented as evidence of disloyalty, basic operational necessities became proof of treason. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. They asked the same questions in different ways. They noted every hesitation, every inconsistency in his exhausted responses. When he said the same thing twice, they accused him of rehearsing lies. When he said something differently, they accused him of changing his story. There was no winning. At dawn, they threw him in a cell with 15 other men. Some were deserters. Some were accused collaborators. Some were officers who'd lost battles and needed to be blamed. One man had been arrested for writing a letter to his wife that mentioned food shortages. Defeatist propaganda, they called it. Another had been denounced by his own son, a young pioneer who'd overheard his father criticize Stalin after too much vodka. They all had one thing in common. They were waiting for trial, and trials in the Soviet system had predetermined outcomes. Days blurred together. Morning inspections. Thin soup. Interrogations that repeated the same accusations with slight variations. No access to witnesses who could support his defense. No opportunity to present evidence. Just confession after confession being extracted from exhausted, broken men in other cells. Sidorenko heard the screams at night, heard the sounds of beatings, heard the silence that followed when men finally signed whatever documents their interrogators demanded. He refused to sign. Not out of bravery, he was too exhausted for bravery, but out of stubborn belief that truth had to matter. That somewhere in the Soviet system, someone would see the absurdity of these charges. That competence couldn't truly be a crime. 3 weeks after his arrest, they offered him a choice. Sign a confession admitting to exaggerated claims and minor dereliction of duty, accept demotion and transfer to a punishment battalion, or face formal trial for treason. The first option meant probable death in a Strafbad assault. The second meant certain execution. "How is this a choice?" Sidorenko asked. The interrogator shrugged. "One path offers redemption through sacrifice. The other offers only dishonor. The party is merciful even to the guilty. Choose." Sidorenko understood the game. They needed his confession to justify their investigation. An admission of guilt, even for lesser charges, validated the resources spent on his case. It closed the file neatly. And if he died in a punishment battalion, well, that was just another casualty of war. But refusal meant a trial that would be used to make an example. Public humiliation. Execution. His name dragged through propaganda as a warning to other soldiers. This is what happens when you think yourself superior to the collective, when you believe individual skill matters more than party loyalty. He signed the confession, not because he believed it, but because he wanted to live long enough to prove it false. Because in a punishment battalion, there was at least a chance to fight, to die doing what he did best, killing Germans, to earn back through blood what had been stolen through paperwork. They processed him quickly after that, stripped him of his rank, gave him the uniform of a Strafnik, a penal soldier. No insignia, no identification beyond a number. He became one of the thousands of men the Soviet system deemed expendable, suitable only for missions where survival was unlikely and death was expected. The punishment battalion was assembled at a camp near Kursk. 200 men, all condemned for various crimes, real and imagined. Deserters who'd been caught, officers who'd failed, soldiers who'd spoken carelessly, men like Sidorenko, who'd been too good at their jobs and made someone nervous. Their commander was a regular army captain named Sokolov, a man with dead eyes and a voice like gravel. He'd been assigned to lead Strafbats for 2 years, a punishment for his own unnamed crime. He gave them one speech. You are not soldiers. You are criminals, given one chance at redemption. You will be used to clear minefields, to assault fortified positions, to draw enemy fire so real soldiers can advance. Most of you will die. If you die bravely, your families will be told you fell as heroes. If you run, you will be shot by blocking detachments behind you. If you survive 5 successful missions, you may be restored to regular service. Questions? No one asked questions. The math was clear. 5 missions in a punishment battalion meant almost certain death. Most Strafniks died on their first assault. Those who survived rarely made it to a second. 5 missions was a fantasy, a carrot dangled to keep them obedient. The first mission came a week later. They were to assault a German strongpoint that had repelled 3 previous attacks. The objective was a fortified farmhouse on a hill overlooking a strategic crossroads. German machine guns commanded the approaches. Minefields covered the open ground. Regular units had tried frontal assault twice and flanking maneuvers once. All had failed with heavy casualties. Now it was the punishment battalion's turn. Their mission wasn't really to take the strong point. Their mission was to die trying, to exhaust German ammunition and reveal defensive positions so the next attack, by real soldiers, might succeed. They attacked at dawn. 200 men running across open ground toward machine gun fire. No artillery support, no covering fire, just bodies meant to absorb bullets. Sidorenko ran with them, but he wasn't like them. He'd spent months studying German defensive tactics. He understood fields of fire and blind spots. He knew how machine gunners thought, where they focused their attention. While others ran straight ahead and died, he moved laterally, using terrain, reaching dead ground where German guns couldn't depress low enough to hit him. He reached the farmhouse perimeter with 11 other survivors. Everyone else was dead or wounded in the field behind them. German soldiers inside the building were reloading, preparing for the next wave. They didn't expect anyone to get this close. Sidorenko didn't have his sniper rifle. He had a standard-issue Mosin Nagant and 4 grenades. Not precision tools, but tools nonetheless. He signaled the other survivors, mostly through gestures, as coordinated tactics weren't expected from punishment battalions. 3 men created a distraction at the front. Sidorenko and 4 others moved to the rear entrance. The fight inside the farmhouse was brutal and brief. Close quarters, no mercy. When it ended, the German strong point was taken. The cost: 189 dead Strafniks, 12 survivors, including Sidorenko. Captain Sokolov stared at him afterward with something like recognition. "You're a soldier," he said. Not a question, a statement. "I was." "What did you do to end up here?" "I was too good at killing Germans." Sokolov laughed bitterly. "Of course you were." That night, as Soviet regular forces consolidated the position, Sidorenko sat among the ruins and thought about the men who died in the assault. Most had been criminals or cowards, maybe. But some had been soldiers like him, competent men whose competence had threatened someone, capable men whose capability had been seen as dangerous. The Soviet Union was winning the war, but it was eating its own soldiers to do it. And Sidorenko was still alive, which meant there would be more missions, more assaults, more impossible objectives, until statistics caught up with him and he became another number in a report, another Strafnik who'd redeemed himself through death. 4 missions to go. Ivan Sidorenko died 3 times in official Soviet records before his heart actually stopped beating. The first death was administrative, his name removed from commendation lists, his kill count attributed to other snipers, his existence erased from unit histories as if he'd never fought at all. The second death was bureaucratic, his confession to falsified claims used to posthumously disgrace him, turning a decorated soldier into a cautionary tale about dishonesty and individual ambition. The third death was the one that mattered least, the actual moment when German shrapnel tore through his chest during his 4th Punishment Battalion assault, leaving him to bleed out in a crater while the war machine rolled forward without pause. But by then, Ivan Sidorenko had already been dead for months. They'd just forgotten to tell his body. The second mission came 2 weeks after the farmhouse assault, a river crossing under fire. The Dnieper was wide and cold, and the Germans held the far bank with entrenched positions. Regular Soviet forces needed a foothold, which meant the Punishment Battalion would provide one by dying in sufficient numbers to create confusion and draw fire. They crossed in the pre-dawn darkness, rafts cobbled together from logs and barrels. German flares turned night into day. Machine gun fire stitched patterns across the water. Half the battalion died before reaching the far shore. Sidorenko made it across by abandoning his raft early and swimming the last 100 meters underwater, surfacing behind a partially submerged barge that provided cover. 23 men reached the German side. They held a tiny beachhead for 6 hours, fighting off counterattacks, until regular forces could establish a proper crossing. By the end, only 7 Strafniks remained alive. Sidorenko was one of them, bleeding from a grazing wound across his ribs, but still functional. 2 missions complete, 3 to go. Captain Sokolov started using him differently after that. During the 3rd mission, clearing a fortified village, Sokolov gave Sidorenko a scoped rifle taken from a dead German sniper. "You know how to use this," Sokolov said. Not a question. Sidorenko took the rifle. It felt right in his hands. Familiar, like returning home after a long absence. During the assault, while other Strafniks charged machine gun nests, Sidorenko provided precision fire from cover. He killed 11 Germans, officers, machine gunners, anyone who posed a threat to the advancing penal soldiers. His shots turned a probable massacre into a costly but successful attack. 43 Strafniks died taking the village. Sidorenko survived again, and this time his survival wasn't luck. It was skill reasserting itself despite the system's attempts to destroy it. After the third mission, Sokolov pulled him aside. They sat in a destroyed barn while rain poured through the shattered roof. Sokolov lit a cigarette with trembling hands, the shakes of a man who'd seen too much death. "I made inquiries about you," Sokolov said quietly. "Asked some friends in administration. You were the ghost of Stalingrad. Over 60 confirmed kills. Terrified the Germans." He paused. "Political officer named Volkov filed the charges against you. Said you were a risk to unit cohesion. Said exceptional soldiers create dangerous precedents." "I know." "Do you know Volkov was removed from his position 3 months ago, accused of excessive zeal, sent to a labor camp in Siberia?" Sokolov laughed without humor. "The system that destroyed you destroyed him too. That's how it works. It eats everyone eventually." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you might survive your 5 missions. Statistics say you won't, but you're not statistics. And if you do survive, if you earn restoration to regular service, you need to understand something." Sokolov met his eyes. "They will never acknowledge what happened to you. Your record is altered. Your achievements are erased. Your confession is filed. The machine doesn't admit mistakes. It just moves forward and crushes whatever's behind it. So even if I survive, I'm still dead. In every way that matters, yes." Sidorenko had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed felt like a bullet he couldn't dodge. He'd clung to the hope that redemption through combat would restore his honor, his rank, his identity. But Sokolov was right. The Soviet system didn't rehabilitate. It simply recycled broken soldiers until they were used up. "Then why keep fighting?" Sidorenko asked. Sokolov took a long drag on his cigarette. "Because the alternative is letting them win. Not the Germans, them, the political officers, the bureaucrats, the system. They want us to become numbers, to accept that individual lives don't matter, that truth doesn't matter, that only the collective vision of reality matters. Every time you survive a mission they designed to kill you, every time you use skill they tried to erase, you prove them wrong. It's not much, but it's something." The 4th mission was the one that killed him. They were ordered to assault a German artillery position that was shelling Soviet supply lines. The position was in a forest, well defended, with multiple fallback positions and overlapping fields of fire. Intelligence suggested 200 German soldiers. The punishment battalion had been reduced to 94 men through attrition. Simple math said the mission was impossible. They attacked at dusk. Sidorenko led a flanking group through dense undergrowth, using his sniper training to move silently and spot German sentries before they could raise alarms. His group eliminated 3 observation posts, allowing the main assault to achieve surprise. The battle lasted 40 minutes. It was chaos. Grenades, rifle fire, men screaming in German and Russian, smoke, and confusion. Sidorenko killed 7 Germans with precise shots, then switched to a captured submachine gun when combat became close quarters. He cleared 2 bunkers. He saved 3 Strafniks from a German counterattack. He was doing what he did best, fighting. Then the shrapnel hit. A German defensive grenade, thrown from a trench he hadn't cleared. The explosion was close enough to lift him off his feet and slam him into a tree. He felt the impact before the pain. Multiple pieces of metal punching through his chest and abdomen. Hot, sharp, wrong. He fell into a crater, the world spinning, Sounds became muffled. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Blood spread across his chest, dark and fast. Above him, the battle continued. Soviet Strafniks were winning. They'd break the German position in another few minutes. But Sidorenko wouldn't see it, wouldn't benefit from it, wouldn't add it to his count of missions survived. He thought about many things as his life bled into the mud. He thought about the forests near his village where he'd learned to hunt, about his father teaching him patience, precision, respect for the prey, about the first German officer he'd killed in Stalingrad, how that shot had felt righteous and necessary, about Dmitri, his spotter, forced to write statements against him, about the ghost, the legend he'd become, now dying anonymously in a crater far from where that legend was born. He thought about all the men like him, skilled soldiers destroyed by a system that feared competence more than it feared the enemy. How many others had been erased? How many names had been removed from histories? How many achievements had been attributed to safer, more politically reliable soldiers? The Soviet Union would win this war. He knew that now. The tide had turned at Stalingrad, where he'd played his small part. The Germans were being pushed back. Victory was inevitable, but victory would be built on mountains of corpses, and among those corpses would be thousands of Soviet soldiers killed, not by Germans, but by their own system's paranoia and cruelty. Captain Sokolov found him 20 minutes later. The German position had been taken. The surviving Strafniks, 31 of 94, were regrouping. Sokolov knelt beside Sidorenko, saw the wounds, knew immediately they were fatal. "You got them," Sokolov said softly. "The artillery position is ours. Mission successful." Sidorenko tried to speak but couldn't. Blood filled his throat. His fourth mission, one away from theoretical redemption, one away from a freedom that didn't exist anyway. "I'll write the report," Sokolov continued. "I'll say you died heroically. I'll recommend your restoration to regular status posthumously. They probably won't approve it, but I'll try." He paused. "For what it's worth, you were one of the best soldiers I ever commanded. The best, probably. And they destroyed you for it." Sidorenko's vision was fading. The pain was fading too, replaced by cold numbness. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would be remembered. But there were no words, just the growing darkness and the distant sounds of war continuing without him. He died in that crater as the sun set. No witnesses except Sokolov. No ceremony. No recognition. Just another casualty in a punishment battalion, another number in a casualty report, another forgotten soldier in a war that devoured millions. Sokolov kept his promise. He filed a report recommending posthumous restoration of rank and honors for Sergeant Ivan Sidorenko, sniper, 60-plus confirmed kills, killed in action while leading an assault on German positions. The report was received by military administration, reviewed by political officers, and quietly buried. The recommendation was denied. The reason given: insufficient evidence of rehabilitation from previous charges. Sidorenko's name appeared in no official histories of the war. His kills were attributed to other snipers or simply left anonymous. His file was sealed and eventually lost in the vast Soviet archives. The ghost of Stalingrad became a ghost in truth, a whisper, a rumor, a story soldiers told each other but couldn't verify. 70 years later, a researcher digging through newly opened Soviet military archives would find fragments of his story. A requisition form with his name, an interrogation transcript, Sokolov's unacknowledged report, pieces of a life that had been systematically erased. The researcher would try to publish findings about Sidorenko and other disappeared Soviet snipers. But even decades after the war, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, official Russian military history would resist acknowledging these stories. Because admitting what happened to men like Sidorenko meant admitting the system had been diseased, meant acknowledging that the Soviet Union had won World War II not despite its brutal internal politics, but at tremendous cost, because of them. Meant recognizing that thousands of capable soldiers had been destroyed by the very state they fought to defend. Some truths are too uncomfortable for nations to face. So Ivan Sidorenko remains erased, his kills attributed to others, his sacrifice forgotten, his story a footnote in unmarked files. He terrified the Nazis with his skill. He was destroyed by his own command for that same skill. And in the end, both his triumph and his tragedy disappeared into the machinery of history. The ghost of Stalingrad haunts no memorials. His name appears on no monuments. He exists only in fragments and whispers, in stories that might be true or might be amalgamations of many similar fates. A soldier who did everything right and was punished for it. A hero who became a suspect, a man who proved that in Stalin's Soviet Union, excellence was dangerous and survival was often more about political reliability than battlefield capability. History remembers the great battles, the turning points, the strategic victories. But history forgets the individual soldiers who made those victories possible and were then consumed by the system they served. Ivan Sidorenko was one of thousands, and thousands of stories like his remain untold.